press the record. Probably all just heard that recording in progress message. So we are recording now. For those who missed it, we have Rachel Jones here, who is our BSL interpreter for this session. So if you need BSL interpretation, Rachel is the video to pin. So welcome to, this is the third talk in our Introducing Collections series, where we invite a curator or a director of a collection to talk about their collection, how they acquire works for their collection, and kind of what the remit of their collection is. And today we are very pleased to welcome Lara Wardle, who is the director of the Jerwood Collection. And we've asked Lara to come and do this talk ahead of an exhibition that's opening in November, which will showcase works from the Gerward Collection and Outside In's own collection at the Harley Gallery in Nottinghamshire, and that opens on the 20th of November. And what I'll do is I'll post a link for more information on that exhibition as we go as well. So Lara's going to speak for about 35 to 40 minutes about the collection. And then Jose Forrest, who is Outside In's regional hub manager in the Midlands, is going to talk about a curating exhibitions course that's been taking place in the lead up to this exhibition. So we've had a group of Outside In artists working on the curation of Outside In's collection and the involvement of that collection in this exhibition. So without further ado, I would very much like to pass over to Lara, who is going to talk about the Jarwood Collection now. Thank you, Lara.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'm going to do the technical bit and share my screen. So I'm going to wait for a thumbs up from Kate that that's all correct. Great. Welcome everybody who's joined for this online talk, Germa Collection, Introducing Collections. And I'm really pleased, as Kate was saying, we've got an exhibition coming up in partnership with Outside In at the Harley Gallery, which opens on the 20th of November. And Jose's going to talk a little bit about that exhibition at the end. I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of Gerward Collection, a little bit about what our mission and purpose is today. And I wanted within that to talk about some of our acquisitions, some historic, and then a couple of more recent purchases, some of which will be shown for the first time in the context of our collection in the forthcoming exhibition at Harley Gallery. So as Kate said, I'm going to talk for about 35 minutes. There's time for questions afterwards. If you've got anything, pop it in the chat box. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the history of our collection, and we're a relatively young collection compared to some other collections. In the context of the Harley Gallery, we're just a year older. And our first work was acquired in 1993, and that's a painting by Brandgren that will be showing you an image of. The collection now numbers around 300 works, and it's predominantly 20th and 21st century British art, and mainly what people call flat art. We have some sculptures in the collection, but really, and there's a few ceramic pieces as well, but really it consists of paintings and works on paper to include collages or prints or drawings or watercolors and gouaches. And officially, the collection started, our first work that we bought by Brandgren was bought at Sotheby's auction house, and it was really at that moment that the hammer went down and our paddle number, which identified us as the buyer, was read out and indicated that Gerward Foundation was the buyer of the Brandgren painting. So we talk about that being the start of the collection, but I suppose the genesis of the collection began before that, although it's difficult to pinpoint a date or a particular moment in time quite as neat as the gavel falling at Sotheby's. Just going to move on to my slide here. So collections, of course, they're about the art that is contained or held within them, but they're often about people. And the Gerward Collection is a privately owned collection. It's owned by Jarwood Foundation. And this is a foundation that was established by Alan Grieve. It was established for John Gerward, who you can see a photograph on the left-hand side of this slide. John was an international entrepreneur and a philanthropist. And in 1977, Alan set up the foundation for him. And at the time, the principal benefactions were in music and education, and with an emphasis on humanity really at the heart of all Gerwood's activities. John died, I've included his dates in this slide, and he died unexpectedly in 1991. And it was at that moment that Alan had to think about the foundation and consider the priorities moving forwards. And Alan took on the full-time role of chairman. And it was under Alan's direction that the foundation's wide-ranging funding programme was put in place. And many of those partnerships, which were initiated in sort of the early days in the 1990s, still continue today. Wanted to move on quite quickly to this slide, which shows 22 Fitzroy Square in London, this rather sort of perhaps quite grand, the exterior of this Georgian townhouse in London, which you can see on the left-hand side. Number 22 is the left-hand door. And then the photograph on the right shows the interior of the first floor room, taken on quite different days, because the photograph on the right looks quite sunny and it looks quite overcast, the one in the left, so not taken at the same time. But this was the building that Alan bought as the base for the foundation after John had died, when he was thinking about the future of the foundation and what should happen and what its priorities should be. And I suppose perhaps it's at this moment when the building was bought. As you can see, it's a large townhouse, had many empty walls in all the rooms. And perhaps it was then that the path for the Germa Collection as it now is was set. Alan already had an interest in the field. He had been collecting personally, and Fitzroy Square is adjacent to what had been Duncan Grant's studio in Bloomsbury. There's lots of connections to 20th century British artists locally, and the building itself almost became an open invitation to start a collection within the field of 20th century British art. And the foundation was based here until 2011. And during this period, from the early 90s until 2011, nearly 200 works were bought. And as you can imagine, all the walls became filled with art, and many works, in fact, were out on long-term loan because the building, in fact, couldn't house the size that the collection had become. Actually, today, 2021, we're now nearly 300 works, and we have a much more formal purpose, and we have a stated ambition as well, and that's really to enhance the enjoyment and understanding of 20th and 21st century British art, which we do through our loaning programme, which I wanted to speak a little bit more about. And the purchasing for the collection has sort of mirrored the foundation's overarching ethos of being private, opportunistic, and entrepreneurial. And we are a bit unusual. We don't have an annual budget for purchasing, and we don't have a published acquisition policy. The buying of works has really been in the main decided by Alan, and I joined Gerward in 2010, and this has been one of my main roles to advise on acquisitions. And I suppose in that way, it's very different from a traditional museum collection. Some of the paintings tell the wider Gerwood story, prizes that have been awarded, early career artists that have been supported, or locations that have a specific resonance with Gerwood Foundation. But all the works that have been acquired have been bought because someone has felt passionately that that particular piece should enter the collection. And of course, personal tastes and preferences have crept in, and it is quite a quirky collection in many ways. So I wanted to move on to the Brandgren painting, just to talk a little bit about our more historic purchases. This was the first painting that was bought for the collection. It was bought, as I said, in 1993 at Sotheby's. It was painted, you can see up at the date, on around 1925. And it's really sort of coincidence or serendipity that this lovely picture is, you know, the work that we can say is the first painting in the collection, and has that, we have reference numbers. It's JC1, Gerward Collection 1, but really the fact that it's JC1 and it's such a wonderfully impressive painting is just down to the order of the lots in the sale at Sotheby's. We bought other works in that sale. In fact, we bought a David Bomberg painting, which you may have spotted in the previous slide in the boardroom. It's sort of postage stamp size on your screen. But the Bomberg was lot 49. This was lot 15. So this is JC1, and I think the Bomberg became JC2. But I love this painting. It's really wonderful to say it was the first work that we bought for the collection. It's sort of an endlessly fascinating painting. I've included in the slide the rather grand carved Spanish frame. Sometimes I think frames give you a sense of the scale of the painting. It's a bit, I've got to admit, slightly unfortunately, I've over trimmed this image, so you're missing a little bit of the frame at the top of the bottom if it looks a bit strange, but hopefully it gives a little bit of an impression of what it might look on the wall. As I said, it's really one of my favourite paintings in the collection, and it's wonderful to always talk about it as the first work that we bought. There's something very atmospheric about the window that has been flung open, obviously on a sort of autumnal day. You have the sprig of what look like very crispy and curled leaves in a tankard on the windowsill, and then there's a few leaves on the stone. And it, you know, you sort of wonder, have they blown in from the window that's been flung open for the last bit of warmth, or have they fallen off the sprig? Looking at art's always a very personal experience, and I think this work has a particular resonance at the moment. We always bring our own memories and our own thoughts when we look at pictures. And now when I return to look at this painting, and we've all lived through the series of lockdowns, I'm perhaps thinking about it in a different way that I looked at it before. We've all been staring rather longingly out of our windows, feeling shut away. And I sort of think about Brandgren, and I think he was rather lonely when he was living in his house and painted this picture. But certainly one of my favourites in the collection. It's always nice to kind of return to it when we think about our historic collecting. I wanted to then talk about a sort of more contemporary strand that we've developed within the Gerward collection. I know in some ways 1994 doesn't feel very contemporary anymore, but this was the first work that was bought in 1994 to develop that strand. And a year after Alan bought the Brandgren painting, he launched the Gerward Painting Prize. And that was a prize, it was actually for, the prize money was £30,000. It was actually the most valuable British art prize at the time. It was awarded between 1994 and 2003 annually. There was one year that actually was a fallow year, but it was given for a body of work rather than a particular painting. And the first winner was Craig Aitchison. And the year that he won the prize, Gerward acquired his crucifixion painting, and it was this painting that entered the collection in 1994. I mean, some of you may be familiar with Craigie's work, and I thought it was nice to include a photograph of him at the Jarwood Painting Prize reception. He might have a glass of champagne in his hand as he's looking towards the photographer. And Alan Grieve recalls that at the moment of the winning announcement, Aitchison could not be found. He had to be retrieved from a nearby pub. So possibly he had more than one glass of champagne that night. Crucifixions, I mean, it's a very sort of significant work for Craigie, and they're a major theme in his work. Although he wasn't religious, the subject certainly struck a particular resonance with him. And I just wanted to read out a quote from Craigie. "The crucifixion is the most horrific story I've ever heard. They were all ganging up against one person. As long as the world exists, one should attempt to record that. It was so unfair." So, as I mentioned, this painting prompted Alan to think about a more contemporary strand. And part of the contemporary strand that was developed for the collection was looking at artists who had won Jerwood Painting Prizes or had been shortlisted. So you might notice in the image on the right that the background behind the Craig Aitchison doesn't look like your traditional gallery background. And I just wanted to move on to the next slide to sort of zoom out on this image, because this brings me quite neatly to talk about our sort of current loaning programme and ways that we think about displaying the collection. So you'll see here on the photograph on the left, well, you may guess from that photograph, it's actually hanging in a cathedral, and the painting is currently on loan to Hereford Cathedral, and it's been on loan there since September 2021. And with the collection, we like to be imaginative about how and where we loan our collection, and also to think about the context of where the work is shown. I mean, for example, with the Craig Aitchison, you know, seeing this painting in a cathedral setting, you know, in a religious setting, can have a very different meaning to seeing this work hung, for example, in a Craig Aitchison show in a gallery. And I think we try and be very open-minded about how and where our works are shown. And I wanted to show another example of our works in a non-gallery setting, as you can see on the slide on the right. And this is through a partnership with an organisation called Paintings in Hospitals, who are a national charity who aim to transform people's sort of health and well-being, and using art in hospital settings and hospice settings to give a better sort of situation for patients and carers within those settings. And last year we collaborated with Paintings in Hospitals and Cambridge University Hospitals, and we developed this exhibition, which you can only see a sort of small corner of in this slide. It was an exhibition called Colour in Motion, and it was hung in the rehabilitation gymnasiums at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. And it had the specific purpose of enhancing this environment, which is a physiotherapy environment, with art that evokes movement and energy. And you can see in the photograph 4 colourful etchings by Ian Davenport, which have been on loan from our collection. And in fact, the exhibition is just coming down now. But at Gerward and across all Gerward organisations, we really pride ourselves on being fleet-footed and working in imaginative and responsive ways. And I'm really keen to continue to think about how we can show our works in these different types of settings and perhaps what could be considered sort of non-traditional art settings. And I think previously we've perhaps fallen into, I don't know whether it's a trap, but a way of thinking about the collection where we think about the collection as the starting point of the exhibitions. And instead, more recently, or in the past couple of years, and you know, we're a collection without a fixed home, we've been able to become more flexible and about thinking about our works and the exhibition settings. So I wanted to show you this slide here. It's all from an exhibition, which you can see at the top, which was shown at Barber Institute of Fine Arts in Birmingham. And the exhibition was sort of very different to any models that I'd worked on with the collection previously. And it was really in discussions with Nicola Kalinsky, director of Barber. And we developed this idea of taking a work recently acquired for Barber's collection and looking at that work in sort of detail through the lens of Gerward Collection works. So in some ways using the Gerward Collection to contextualize their work and then through this context offering an in-depth look when it was created, where the work was created, and what other artists were creating at the same time. I mean, I suppose in some ways you could think of it the other way around and say that, you know, you're looking at the Gerward Collection through the lens of the Barber's work. But you can see in the top left-hand slide, the sculpture by Naum Gabo, Linear Construction in Space #1, which is really such a beautiful piece made in perspex and nylon monofilament, made in the early 1940s when he was based in St Ives during the Second World War. And as we have such a strong holding of St Ives works in the Germa Collection, Nicola and I developed this idea of showing them with the Gabo piece. And in fact, for the exhibition design, the Gabo is placed almost centrally on a plinth with the Gerward Collection works radiating outwards from this central point. And we had archival material, which you can see in the slide at the bottom, and there's some unframed works which are also displayed in the cabinets. To give visitors another way into the works on display and the theme of the exhibition, we borrowed recordings from artists' lives, which is part of National Life Stories. And these are available to listen to at the listening points, which you can see in the slide on the right. And we also had transcripts available of the recordings that you could read. And I just wanted to take a moment, I'm just checking the time, but I think to read one of the recordings. We had all sorts of artists, recordings that we borrowed, Terry Frost, talking about, I think we used a clip of him talking, weaning Barbara Hepworth off whiskey, diluting it down with milk. And we also had Margaret Mellis, who spoke so brilliantly about Gabo, and I just wanted to read a couple of sentences what she said about him, because it sort of really brought this sort of international Russian constructivist to life for me. So Margaret Mellis said, he was very nice, everybody liked him, and he had a frightfully nice Russian accent. And he was very helpful if he ever happened to say anything, or if he liked your things, he said very good things. He didn't seem to be doing any work. In fact, he seemed to do nothing at all, really, except eat yogurt and go for walks. But his ideas seemed to come out to sort of influence people, although he wasn't doing anything or didn't seem to be doing anything. And I just for me, I thought it was a brilliant idea and a way in of understanding the relationships of the artists and looking at this piece in the Barber collection and understanding a little bit about more what the artist was like. I mean, later in the same interview, Mellis admits that then Gabbo got very busy and made lots of boxes to put the sculptures in that he didn't seem to have made, but of course we know he made all these pieces, including this piece. Sadly, I'm sure you could probably spot the sort of rather sort of doomsday exhibition date of 2020 at the top of the slide, and it had a rather sort of shorter run than we'd hoped, open mid-February, and sadly we did go into lockdown, so it had a slightly shorter run. So just think about what we do with the collection. So alongside Jerwood Collection exhibitions, we have a sort of active loaning programme, and I just wanted to sort of illustrate this with these two slides. We loaned works to St Ives exhibition in Bristol last year, and we've got our John Wells work on the left-hand side, and the left-hand side is sort of the larger work on the left-hand side, Near and Far, which was painted in 1959, and the two rather sort of brightly coloured Roger Hilton works in the slide on the right. And we have loans that go out from the collection to exhibitions nationally and some internationally as well. We've currently loaned our Sickert painting to Walk of Art Gallery's exhibition, which has just opened, and we've got forthcoming loans going to, for example, First Sight and Town at Art Gallery, and as I said, we've even got a work going to the Netherlands next year. With the collection, we try and enable as many loan requests as possible. And as I said at the beginning of the talk, we're a bit unusual because we don't have an annual acquisition budget or a published acquisition policy, and we are still actively buying works for the collection, and that really falls under my remit. And I'm quite often asked, what are you looking for? Particularly by art dealers who want to sell something. And, you know, I suppose the truth, you know, the truthful answer is that it really changes. The answer changes. It's difficult to give a simple answer. You know, I think it's very important that the collection is not static or fixed, and that it evolves. And I endeavour to make our acquisitions relevant, both in the context of the collection and how it's been built up historically, but also in the important context of it becoming new work becoming part of a collection that's for public display. And these aren't mutually exclusive concepts, but I really feel it's very important they're considered with each purchase. So I just wanted to sort of come towards the end of my bit before handing over to Josie, looking at two new acquisitions, which I think demonstrate how we collect for Gerward today. And I'm really pleased that both of them are going to be included in the forthcoming exhibition. So I'm just going to move on. So they're very different works. They've actually been created over 100 years apart. But the first one I want to talk about is this incredibly rare self-portrait by Dora Carrington, which you can see was created in 1913. So Carrington, as she preferred to be known, she was one of an incredibly talented generation of artists that studied at the Slade School in the early 20th century. And that generation included artists such as William Roberts and Stanley Spencer, David Bomberg, Mark Gertler, and Paul Nash, amongst others. And this portrait was painted by Carrington just at the end of her time at the Slade. She was obviously working within a very sort of male orientated and of course male dominated world, and she would have faced many prejudices. I think of her as a very sort of brave person. She challenged, you know, sort of accepted notions of her gender, which, you know, which were very prevalent in the early 20th century. She cut her hair short, she discarded her Christian name, and she wore clothes that probably raised eyebrows in post-Edwardian London. In the painting, in the self-portrait, you can see that she's dressed in what looks like perhaps a man's green striped shirts. She's wearing these huge, voluminous, oversized trousers. She's got these wonderfully sort of dapper shoes on with red heels and the striped socks. And I think it's a very bold statement for a young female artist. I think what's so interesting about this work is it's almost at odds of photographs of Carrington, where she appears possibly rather shy or self-effacing. And I wanted to just show you some photographs taken. So the photograph on the left-hand side of the screen is when Carrington was at the Slade School, probably taken around 1911, so a little bit before the self-portrait. But Carrington's the figure on the left-hand, so looking sort of down through her fringe and to the side, and she's with fellow Slade School students. And then you can see there's two other photographs. She's with Lytton Strachey, and in the middle photograph, she's with, it was taken by Lady Ottoline Morrell, and she's there with Ralph Partridge and other characters. But you can see her rather perhaps unusual outfit she's wearing. She's wearing sort of jackets with, I don't know, they're sort of patterned sleeves, but in all of them she looks rather sort of different to how she sees herself. I'm just going to go back to the picture, if I may. So this work has been held in a private collection. It was in the Barbican's 1995 Carrington exhibition, and I'm really thrilled that this has been chosen to be included in the forthcoming show. I wanted to just use this as an example, so slightly going back to talking about how our new acquisitions are considered. Because although Carrington's been rather sort of sidelined in a story of 20th century British art, there's quite a resurgence of interest in her work. And I think from my point of view, she really felt like a missing link in the collection. We had works, or we have works by William Roberts, by Stanley Spencer, by Paul Nash, and holding so many Slade contemporaries and not having a work by Dora Carrington felt really imbalanced. And I think this work on the other side of it has huge relevance for a contemporary audience. I think looking at this work might prompt people to think about challenges that women have faced or do face, or people, what challenges people face. It might prompt people to think about how we see ourselves, how we portray ourselves, that we should wear what we want to wear, that we shouldn't feel that we should conform in any way. And for me, certainly, it's a painting about how differences should be celebrated. And I think that it just very much felt like the right work to buy, on bearing in mind both those sort of two sides of thinking about acquisitions. So I'm just going to go past the side of the photographs, and then I want to talk about another really recent acquisition, which is drawn by contemporary artist Barbara Walker. As I said, over 100 years after the Carrington works. It's very recent work, 2020. Vanishing Point 13 Veronese, and it's part of an ongoing series of drawings which explores the presence of Black subjects in Western European painting. And for these works, Barbara Walker takes historic paintings, for example, by Titian, or in this case, Veronese or Van Dyck, and she makes graphite drawings over an embossed surface, which I hope you can see in the slide image just about. And I just find these drawings absolutely extraordinary. They're absolutely exquisitely executed, and they raise questions about what is seen and what is unseen, and about how different people have been portrayed in paintings, and about the narratives that have been told to us. And she brings to the forefront characters and people who have been marginalized or ignored, and she really, I find it very, she makes us question what we've looked at and what we might have missed before. Just hope I prepared the other slide. I just want to double check. Yes. So I just wanted to show the painting, if you can sort of see it, of the Veronese that it's based on. So you can, it's actually a very slightly gruesome biblical story. So if you're into rather grisly biblical stories, this one about Judith, yes, from the book of Judith, and she anyway decapitates a Syrian general whose head you can see in her hand. So yes, if you like this story, I'm just going to go back to Barbara Walker's work. I think what's so interesting is, the man has kind of gone from this work totally, but, here we have, she brings to the forefront a character or a person from the story that has really been, in the original painting, completely subsumed within the background. And I was very pleased to be able to acquire it recently. This series, Vanishing Point, was originally developed, in fact, for the Evelyn Williams Drawing Award, and Barbara Walker had received this in 2017 as part of the Gerward Drawing Prize, and she was the first recipient of this award. And it allowed her to develop a new body of work for an exhibition at Jarwood Gallery, which is now Hastings Contemporary, which was shown in 2019. And as Barbara Walker had been in the Germa Drawing Prize and shown at the Gerward Gallery, it did feel very relevant to acquire this work. And I also felt that it has huge relevance for a contemporary audience. As I said, it asks us to question sort of all sorts of things and makes us look hard and think very hard and reassess what possibly we thought we knew or we thought we were looking at. And I'm really thrilled that this is going to be included as well in the forthcoming exhibition. I'm slightly conscious of time, so I wanted to hand over to Josie at this moment, and then I can take any questions at the end. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to, Kate, should I stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, if you go for it, if you stop sharing, and then yeah, we can pass over to Josie, if that's okay with you, Josie, now.
Hi everyone, I'm Josie Forrest, Hub Programme Manager for the Midlands. Briefly, just to tell you a little about Outside In, if you don't know. So Outside In is an organisation specifically for those who find it difficult to access the mainstream art world. We support those who have issues or challenges around health, disability, isolation or social circumstance. Just to briefly tell you about the Outside In collection. The Outside In collection is made up of approximately 130 works from non-traditional and traditional excluded artists. It's the first of its kind in the UK. The works range from anything including drawing, photography, print, textiles, and mixed media and sculptural works. The Kindred Spirits project was initiated as part of our Step Up programme, and it was specifically the first of our curating exhibitions courses that we've run. And we really wanted to do something with the course to give participants a space to discuss and explore and really interrogate the role of a curator. These courses were 6 workshops in total, some of this self-directed study, some of this physically and remotely. We also did things over WhatsApp and did video and so on. But it was very much about giving access to artists that might be housebound, access to artists that could physically get to workshops. So we ran workshops at the Harley Gallery, we ran them at Art Space in Coventry. Artists also took part in a small visiting programme with Art Space in Coventry and the Herbert Art Gallery. They were able to take part in guided tours and have a talk from a curator, Adelaide Bannerman, at Invisible Dust as part of Unnatural Histories that was showing at the Herbert Art Gallery. So in choosing the artists, we had 5 artists in total take part over 6 weeks. And it was really about wanting those artists to explore their practice as artists and curators. So it was really important to express that duality of being an artist. And I felt that that added something different to the course in regards to artists came fully formed. You know, they had ways of thinking, ways of seeing, different methodologies that they brought to the course. And as I say, there were different ways of exploring. We did all kinds of stuff where artists were housebound. We were able to, you know, run the course on Zoom. We were able to chat to them personally or adapt things via WhatsApp Live if we needed to. So there was also what we did was really wanted the artists to dictate the pace. We didn't want outside in to dictate what a curatorial course was. So it was very much about the artist bringing their own thoughts and methods to the course as well over those 6 weeks. The artist, as I said, it kind of interrogated the role of a curator. You know, what does a curator do? What is that made up of? And that led us to different methodologies in regards to thinking about the role of a curator and what the content of the exhibition could be. They were able to really express their thoughts and practices and methodologies in those workshops. They also interrogated different methods and ways of creating. They discussed space, the audience, different ways of interpreting. And they were left with questions really that they explored as part of the course. What is the story they want to tell? What were the links between the 2 collections? And how did they want to tell that story? And that was really explored through different methods and styles of display. As a result, we have one of the artist curators that will be creating new work as part of the exhibition. They also wanted to kind of move away to some extent from the traditional museum format. So they are looking at different ways of displaying as well. And they were very much involved in all of that. As well as that, we had the director at Harley, Lisa G, actually sitting on one of those workshops. And that was really, you know, something different that I've seen before. They were able to bounce off each other in regards to developing the display and look at different ways of hanging works and to think about how they wanted to interpret as well in a different way by using music as well in the exhibition. I'm not going to go into what works are chosen because we're at a point where we're in the process of design at the moment, and it might be that some of the works that have been chosen have been might be omitted. But that's it, basically. It was quite a intuitive process, I would say. The artists, for some of them, it was really about the aesthetic of some of the pieces, but then also it was about the themes that they come up with in the end, which is very much looking at 3 different rooms that will look at materiality, drawing, and interpretation of reality, which is very much about thinking about different worlds and so on. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Josie, and thank you, Lara, as well. Really interesting to hear more about the Gerward collection and see some of the images of the wonderful works that you have in the collection. So thank you for that. Has anybody got any questions for Lara or for Josie or for any of us? Feel free to unmute, or you can write it in the chat and I can read it out if you'd rather not say it.
Not my dog who's got a question. So.
Claire's got Here we go. So Claire has asked, Lara, what would be your dream acquisition for the collection?
Oh, that is a good question. Do I have, you know, any budget? Sort of. Oh, that's a good question. You give me a budget? No, you're not giving me a budget. What would be a dream acquisition? You know, we do have gaps in the collection because we're not, you know, we have 300 works, we're not the largest collection, and we don't hold ourselves up to be, and we don't aspire to be a definitive 20th and 21st century British collection. There's definitely things that spring to mind. What would be, you know, I think that, you know, the great Ben Nicholson would be, you know, because we have such a strong holding of St Ives. We do have a fantastic early Nicholson 1928 lino cuts, but I still think we're sort of, that is quite a gap. So today, I'm going to answer that today with Ben Nicholson, but it might be a different answer tomorrow.
Thank you. Has anybody else got a question? It's okay if nobody has. What I'm going to do, whilst just to see if, here we have a question from Julia, who has asked, do you or would you include outsider artists in the Jarwood collection?
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting. I think it's quite an interesting question. I mean, I think you're probably suggesting, would we consider, I don't know whether you're meaning contemporary outsider artists or more historic outsider artists. I think there's a drive, not just for us, but actually lots of collections to think either. Okay, so you know, I think there's a drive to think, you know, as I was talking, it's a bit like the Barbara Walker, sorry to go off a complete tangent. It's a bit like the narratives we're told, so the sort of canon of artists that we now accept. Should we be thinking outside that? Should we be thinking really a brilliant, well, you know, a great one British collection should have Dora Carrington, not that she's not, you know, in some ways it has been a sort of outsider artist. So we definitely, would we include a contemporary work? I think yes, if it has those kind of points of relevance. When we acquire new works, we always have to think how they relate to works in the collection. So if it's a work by an outsider artist that's completely different and hasn't got a sort of connection with works in the collection, probably not. But if it has connections and relevance, then yes, we'd definitely consider it. And I think we have to be really thoughtful also with historic works, not just collecting the sort of perceived to be kind of big names, and think very laterally about our collecting. So the simple answer is yes.
Great, thanks, Lara. I have just put the link to the exhibition page on Outside In's website in the chat. So that opens on the 20th of November at the Harley Gallery, which is in Nottinghamshire, and that will be open until February 2022. And that's called Kindred Spirits and brings together works from the Germa Collection. and works from outside in the collection. If nobody's got any final questions, I will say thank you very much, Lara, for presenting for us today. It's been fabulous to have the chance to hear more about the Gerward collection, particularly ahead of the exhibition. It just brings it to life a bit more, I think, which is great. And thank you, Josie, for talking about the Curating Exhibitions project as well, which sounds amazing. And I'm so excited to see what the artists who have taken part in that have been up to. And thank you, everybody, for joining us as well. As I say, this is recorded, so you can watch it back on our website at some point soon. We'll get it on there. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.